If you want to see how we do product design at Jam, you're in the right place. This episode is going to be a tactical, no-fluff walkthrough of the Figma behind our latest product release. Martin just joined the Jam team. He's an extremely talented product designer, and he's going to take us through end-to-end this whole process, starting from user feedback to all the different design variations, and then ultimately the product decisions we ended up making. If you're listening to this episode, all the associated visuals are going to be at the link in the description. Let's get started.
So this is the new dashboard with the new preview cards. And as you can see, one, it looks a lot cleaner and nicer, but also the videos aren't auto-playing like they were before. So if you had more than, I don't know, 3 jams, this whole page would essentially scream at you and everything would kind of flash in autoplay. Yeah. Do you want to see how it's made?
Yeah, take me from the beginning.
So I don't really have a screenshot of the current dashboard, but I did pull some excerpts or like just some screenshots of how our cards look like on the dashboard before. And they were pretty messy, to be honest. So we have the states at the top, then sometimes, so the default state, so how you look at a jam on your dashboard, and we would essentially display just like how long the video or the jam is, and then when it was recorded. And when you hovered over it, we would have a copy link function, but also we'd have these weird icons in different positions. And then sometimes if you would like select a jam, we would also then like have this issue of conflicting UI elements. Then descriptions were sometimes on the jams and then sometimes not displayed, because sometimes jams can have descriptions, sometimes they can't. And we also have these integrations, so we display to users if their jam was actually sent to one of the issue trackers that they've connected to the tool. And then what happens when you have multiple integrations, or you've sent a ticket to you've sent a jam to multiple tools, we would then like stack them and this whole thing would essentially explode. So,
and so what's the next step here? Like where did you take this now after you identify all these concepts?
I looked at, like, I didn't only take screenshots. I actually played around with the tool, and then I listened to quite some customer interviews about this. And so like they were complaining. And they were mainly complaining about the bells and whistles. And I just listed out sort of the improvements areas here. This is not rocket science, but generally like people, customers and users are complaining that everything autoplays and they don't want it to autoplay. And so autoplaying is great if you have like maybe 1 or 2 jams on your dashboard. If you have more, which many of our users have, the tool starts screaming at you and you're almost like, why is this happening? Right? Like imagine going to YouTube and like every video autoplaying all at once, right? That's crazy. That's like, what is going on, right? And it's not very focused, and it's not designed in the intent, right? Like you have a cursor to move across the page, and that's sort of like a connection of the intent or where you want to go next within the product, at least on desktop. And so we should probably fix that. And that was coming from a lot of customers, actually. So I think this other stuff is just me using the product and being a designer and just having a little bit of product intuition, which is like, hey, once you hover over the jam, we actually don't show the jam anymore. And so like, if the purpose of the thumbnail is for you to identify the jam, and open it up, right? Or to copy the link and make sure that you're sending the link to the right jam, this is actually kind of working against us in this case, right? You're not actually helping the user identify that, okay, is this actually the jam that I wanted to share or the jam that I wanted to click on and take a look at? So we're making recall actually harder. And then the other thing that you think about as a designer or a product person a lot is, I don't know if you've noticed, but do you see this thing on the top right here?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what that is?
Is that a preview of the full page?
No. It's like
is it your
a
icon,
pixelated user avatar. Yeah.
Oh.
And so like it's the creator of the jam. And so, the creator, as here you can see maybe a better example, but even if you have annotations, like this really gets lost. And also like, what does C mean anyway, right? That looks like copywriting to me. Like the copyright, like trademark.
Oh, and this is the default state, right? Like
right.
if a
and
user
so like here you can see a picture of like Danny actually having her own avatar. But the point is like you don't control the avatars that people upload, right? Like what if they want like, I don't know, some fun NFT they bought, or like, I don't know, a picture of the cat, right? You probably
Mhm.
want a little bit more context and you want to put the creator more to the front, right? And you want to communicate to people that this is a tool that should be used within a team, right? And
Mhm.
so it's real avatars with real names as a combination and putting them a little bit more in the front seat. And then like,
This
this is
makes me
just
want to
designer stuff,
cry.
but like the UI just makes me cry, right? There's overlapping UI elements and like weird positioning of things. So, um, yeah, that's like the recap of the improvement areas. And generally, like what I do with everything is like you look at the customer inputs, right? You look at the data if you have any, right? And then you layer on your intuition as well, right? And depending on what stage you're on, what you're developing, what feature, what problem you're trying to solve, you have to like gravitate towards one or the other. Sometimes you need to rely a little bit more on intuition. Sometimes data is the way.
Hmm.
Um,
I'm dying for you to
yeah,
show me these iterations. Like, so where,
these
like,
iterations.
how do you start like working on it, or like taking these problems and turning them into different like solution hypothesis?
So
Like,
first kind of decomposed like what we actually needed to do. And then I actually created four different prototypes of different ways of how we could visualize it. And I'm just a big believer in prototypes because you want to get to the real thing as fast as possible. And I think a lot of the nooks and crannies before you send anything off to engineering is just you'll figure it out by doing the interaction design in a prototype. So
hmm.
this was the first iteration of it where we got rid of the autoplay. We progressively disclosed on hover some of the actions, like the selection and the copy link feature. And if you hover over a video, it actually autoplays, right? So now your cursor is kind of the intent, right? And if you're hovering over something, you probably want to see a preview of it.
Hmm.
And also, we made it very clear, like what you're hovering on, right? Not only by the progressive disclosure, but we got some visual sort of state management stuff going on here.
Oh, and I
Um,
love how you can see the person a lot more clearly, right?
right.
I
And
guess
now
what we don't see
it's
is the title of the jam now, right? Or I
right.
guess maybe we do.
Exactly. So then we were thinking like some of them have descriptions, but all of them have the author. What if we did this switch between like, oh, we show the author if we don't have a description, but then we show the description of the title. Um, if there's a description, just to create a like more consistent visual interface. But that ended up because I prototyped it. That ended up being really confusing because like title of this jam, but then sometimes we display Matt, and then like so that didn't really work. Back to the drawing board, and
What was the core conflict that wasn't working in that last one? Because that last one looked pretty good to me. But
well,
what?
I mean, you're just mixing and matching. Like sometimes you display the title here, and then sometimes you display the author name, and that doesn't make really a lot of sense, to be honest, because
Hmm.
you would want kind of a consistent look and feel and a consistent system also for where to find what on these preview cards.
Hmm. So where do you take it?
So then I played around with okay, like here you can see the separation more clearly in the problem we're tackling, right? Which is like, okay, some of them have a description, some of them don't. And then you can see how this feels kind of empty, right? For some of the
When it
cards
has
in a way
when it has
when it
no
has no
title
description. Exactly.
and no integration, then it's kind of like, oh, is that like it looks like
What
it
is
should be
this even? Right?
spaced differently or something? Like, yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, you could make this like fill this all the way down to the bottom, but it would still look, you'd have a bunch of white space. And one of the problems with the existing dashboard was exactly this. Like we had a lot of sort of visual inconsistency in like the data
Hmm.
that we're showing to users. And you want to create some like don't make me think. Like, you know? Then played a little bit around with just this idea of smart titling. So, oh, well, if we have a description, we show it, and if not, we just say like, "Hey, this jam is by this user," right? Um, Actually, there's kind of an error. This should be like the same font weight, but you kind
Hmm.
of get the point that we're creating like a little bit more of a consistent experience here.
Hmm.
But then again, we only have the avatar, and there's not really context on like who this is if they've actually uploaded their avatar. But if they upload their pet or M, unless we add a tooltip, you don't really know who the author of the jam is.
You can't see the name associated with
Right.
the
Yeah.
person's
With
profile
the
image. Yeah.
exactly the author. Then took a look at some of the title positioning. If you have a title, if you have two lines, if you have no title, um,
And with this one, you're really thinking, what are all the different ways that we can handle
what are
this, or
yeah,
what are all
like
the states?
exactly. What is all the data that we have and all the scenarios that we have? Like we might not have this. Like how does the card then respond to the lack of that data, right? Like if we have description null, right? So nothing in there, like what do we do? And then explored this like, oh, you can hover over the avatar to actually reveal the username. But what we ended up selling or selling for is actually just refining this and polishing this up a little bit more, which is we display the author and we display the title or description and we default to a smart title and description if there's none, right? And so now we sort of get the benefit of both in a way. We get the author of the jam and the title and description sort of below. Cool. And you can also wonderfully select stuff, right? And
Hmm.
ooh, that shouldn't happen. I don't know what's going on here. Figma being weird, but um, yeah.
And
You
then,
can also
oh,
get kind of a look and feel for the interaction on the individual jams, right? So again,
and
like the preview is kind of important. Like if you also want to make it selection choice, right?
one little thing I really like is this intercom slash linear, like on that card. Yeah, that one right there. You have
Yeah.
this
Do you
little
want to talk
like
about it? Yeah.
they bloop together. Like, what is this?
Yeah. 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 The mitosis.
The
So
mitosis.
the mitosis. Remember, I just talked about like we didn't really have a good way to handle like multiple integrations.
Hmm.
Um, so I needed to design kind of a system around that, and so just go over here uh, and do so. So if we think about our workflow, I sort of categorize these into two archetypical workflows. One is a simple workflow, which is you're basically creating a jam and you're sending it to some integration, right? You recorded a bug and you want to add it to your favorite issue tracker. You want to send it to Slack. You want to send it to Notion. You want to send it to Jira Linear, yada, yada, yada. And so this is like you're sending it to one or more output integrations, right? Sending it somewhere. And then we launched a new product called Jam for Customer Support, where your users actually through Intercom can create a jam. But then in our product and on our dashboard, you will see your users' jams. So what your users actually recorded and what came out of an intercom conversation. And so I call this the complex workflow.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's when an input integration, so an integration creates a jam, right? And that's the input integration in a way. And then that input integration probably needs to be handled by your team, right? Some engineer looks at it or some PM or someone in QA even and creates a ticket. But you still want to track that entire chain of workflows. And so then we said, this is how an input would look like from intercom. And then you would kind of have the intercom, I guess, mitosis into the
Hmm.
actual output integration. So you've got two types of integrations. And if you think about it this more on a systematic level, it's essentially where it originated from on the left, so this input integration, and then where you sent it to most recently is sort of your output integration. And that's the combination of those two is the complex workflow. And so our users could be using at some point Zendesk, ServiceNow, or HubSpot for the inputs, and then all these other integrations for the outputs. And that gives us a system to sort of rotate them through.
It's
Does
beautiful.
that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's awesome.
I think another thing, like how we do the prototyping, is just we use a lot of like um, components and then interactive components. And so what that looks like is you can see that this is like the actual card component, and it has multiple variations, or variants, actually, is what they're called. And so we have the state on the first row. And so that's the default state. And then when you hover, it's the row above and it's styled a little bit differently. And then you get this wonderful copy button. You get the ability to select. And then also we have these two types of jams, right? So we have a screenshot or a video, and depending on that, we show, the actual indication of how long that video is or how long that jam is. And then we just link all of this up. And then once we take an instant of that component, we can just pop it into the dashboard, replace the images, and that logic is sort of wired up down below, but it then works across all the cards at the top.
Mm-hmm. So that's how you build such a complex prototype, right? And be able to
exactly. The complexity you reduce down to just the component level.
And so why did we bring the copy link button? Why did we bring it to the top instead of just keeping it in the middle?
Great question. So what initially prompted the redesign was sort of like customer inputs, but also our intuition that this could be a lot better. And we don't want to run into that same issue again where we keep like adding features and it doesn't scale, right? So then we're back to square one of like preview cards that have bells and whistles, and like there's no really consistent design language across all of them. And so one of the main things that we were thinking about with this, as our users develop the muscle for knowing that copy the link is on the top right, we can introduce other primary actions into that card, right? Like being able to share from the dashboard directly, right? And inviting users from there. Or being able to just move the jam, right, into the folder of your choice very quickly. So that was kind of the thinking behind it, to sort of unlock more share functionality. So users can actually, do stuff on the dashboards that's useful, not only to them, but also to us as a product. Yeah. I think that's really it. Yeah.
Were there any changes that you wanted to make that were out of scope or just too difficult to implement, but you think in general is where it's ultimately heading?
I feel like we should definitely clean up our permissions. It's like we have this lock icon on our cards, and depending on where the jam sits in, if it's in a folder or a team, and then what permission structure the team has, like different people have access to the jam. And I think we can clean that up, and we can be a little bit more explicit here, whether that's tooltip or now this is exploring a variety of like different icons we could use at different levels. It's probably way too complicated, but I think that's something I wanted to tackle as well. I think one of the things from an engineering side that we still want to implement but haven't in the first round is like when you hover over one of the videos to autoplay it, and Figma it loads instantly. The way it works in production is actually it takes some time for us to load the video. And so what we actually wanted to do is like, again, use the cursor as the intent. And like, if you're getting close to like, you're close to these 4 videos, right? Or these 4 jams that we're actually preloading in the background. And so like, we don't need to have like a loading spinner indicator, and the preview is more instant. And the more you navigate closer to other parts, right, we're doing the loading in the background. It's sort of very similar sort of interaction with like the initial iPhone keyboard, where all the keys to you look the same size, but actually what was happening is in the background is that the touch areas increase depending on what you were typing in. And so remember the tiny iPhone 4 and 4S? Like actually what was happening on that keyboard was that depending on what word or what letter you were typing in next and the letter you typed before, the field size would change. And that's what made the keyboard feel so magical, right? And so same here. This is probably comparing now real high, excellent product design of a product used by millions to like preview cards, but like the intent is the same, right? You come up with an invisible way of making the performance of the tool better and the interaction more seamless, right? And those things, if you do them really well across the entire product surface area, make a tool feel very, very snappy and very, very nice to use.
Yeah, that's great, Martin. Cool.
Nice.
All right,
Thanks,
thanks,
man.
Martin.